I am Joshua, 32 years old, and my own father pointed a loaded gun directly at my 4-year-old daughter's head just to force me to sign away my life. Before I tell you about how I sent my entire family to prison and stripped them of everything they owned, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The air in my living room tasted like copper and cheap bakery sugar. The afternoon sun was streaming through the front windows, casting long, peaceful shadows across the floorboards, completely contrasting with the absolute nightmare unfolding inside my home. My father, Robert, stood dead center on my worn area rug. His expensive tailored suit practically screamed against the modest furniture my wife and I had saved up for over years of careful budgeting. His hand, the exact same hand that taught me how to ride a bicycle, the hand that used to pat my shoulder when I was a boy, gripped a black, heavy-caliber handgun. The barrel was pressed flush against the temple of my 4-year-old daughter, Hazel. Hazel wasn't crying anymore. She was completely frozen. Her wide, terrified eyes were locked onto mine, pleading for a rescue I couldn't immediately provide. Her tiny chest was rising and falling in rapid, shallow jerks. Her small fingers were clutching a blue plastic dolphin, her knuckles completely white from the strain. She didn't understand what the metal object against her head was, but she understood the pure violence radiating from the man holding it. My sister, Chloe, stood right behind her. Chloe's perfectly manicured fingers, glittering with expensive diamond rings, were dug deep into Hazel's small shoulders. She was holding my little girl completely still so she couldn't run away. Chloe wore a sick, gentle smile, cooing false comforts while acting as a human vice. She looked like a predator playing with her food, utterly detached from the moral horror of what she was participating in. "Sign the loan papers right now or else," Robert roared, the veins in his neck bulging against his pristine silk tie. The sheer volume of his voice made the framed family photos on the walls rattle. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and frantic. This was a man backed into a corner of his own making, ready to sacrifice his own blood to save his skin. My older brother, Carter, stepped forward from his position blocking the hallway. He shoved a thick stack of legal documents right into my chest, the sharp edge of the paper scraping hard against my collarbone. He held out a silver fountain pen, his eyes wild and desperate. "Do it now, Joshua. Stop being a dramatic loser and just sign the damn papers. It's just paper. Sign it so we can leave." I looked past Carter to my mother, Diane. She was leaning casually against my kitchen counter, right next to a white cardboard box of cookies she had brought over as a pathetic prop for this little home invasion. She wasn't horrified. She wasn't pleading for her granddaughter's life. She wasn't crying out for Robert to put the gun down. She laughed. It was a harsh, scraping sound that held zero humor. It was the sound of a woman who felt entirely justified in her cruelty. "Your life means nothing to us?" Diane sneered, her eyes raking over my faded blue nursing scrubs with absolute contempt. "Trash like you owns nothing worth keeping. You've always been the weak link in this family, the disappointment. Now you are going to do your part and make yourself useful for once in your miserable life." My hands shook, but not from fear for myself. I felt a primal, consuming terror for my child, the kind of fear that makes your vision narrow and your blood run ice cold. I refused to take the pen from Carter. I lunged forward, desperate to rip Hazel away from Chloe's tight grip, to put my own body between my father's gun and my little girl. I didn't care if I took a bullet. I just needed her away from them. "Let her go!" I screamed from the bottom of my lungs. That's when Carter violently shoved me back by my shoulders. I stumbled backwards over the wooden coffee table, my legs tangling, and I crashed hard onto the hardwood floor, the breath knocking out of my lungs. And then I heard it. Bang. The gunshot was deafening. It was a physical force that punched the air right out of the room. The sound echoed through the small confines of my suburban house like shattered glass. I felt the shockwave in my teeth. Hazel stopped breathing. Her small body simply crumpled, slipping from Chloe's grasp and falling hard to the carpet. She lay there, motionless. "We warned you this might happen," Diane shouted over the intense ringing in my ears, stepping forward with an accusing, perfectly manicured finger pointed right at my face. You forced us into this corner. Everything that happens now is your fault, Joshua. You brought this on your own house. I dropped to my knees, crawling frantically toward Hazel, terror blinding me as I reached out for my baby. My mind flatlined. I couldn't form a coherent thought. I looked up at the four people who shared my blood, staring at them in absolute, unadulterated horror. They stood tall in my living room, victorious and proud, believing they had just committed the perfect crime. They thought they had finally broken me. They thought I had no options left, nowhere to run, and no one to call. They had no idea what was coming next. What they didn't know was that my house wasn't just a home anymore. It was a high-tech tomb I had carefully dug for them. Every single word, every threat, and that deafening gunshot had just been broadcast live. To fully understand how a wealthy, respected grandfather could hold a loaded gun to his own granddaughter's head over a stack of financial documents, we have to go back. We have to look at the rot beneath the expensive veneer of the Whitmore family. To the outside world, my family was local royalty. My father, Robert, built a massive commercial construction empire from the ground up over 40 years. He was the guy you saw shaking hands with the mayor in the local newspaper. He sponsored charity golf tournaments, threw lavish holiday galas, and even put his name on a new wing of the local hospital. But behind the towering iron gates of our sprawling estate, the family dynamic was a toxic dictatorship, and I was the designated peasant. Growing up, there was a strict, unspoken hierarchy, and everyone knew their place. Carter was the golden child, the firstborn son groomed from birth to take over the corporate empire. He was handed everything on a silver platter. He got brand new sports cars for his birthdays, his expensive Ivy League tuition was fully paid without a second thought, and he received an instant promotion to vice president of operations the very day he graduated college, despite barely scraping by with passing grades. He spent his days barking orders at men twice his age and spending company money on lavish lunches. Chloe was the pampered princess, raised with one specific goal in mind: to marry well and expand the family's social influence. She accomplished her mission when she hooked Dylan, a wealthy and incredibly successful investment banker. Her wedding cost more than most people make in a decade. And then there was me, Joshua, the middle child, the constant disappointment. I never cared about corporate takeovers, stock portfolios, or country club memberships. I hated the fake smiles and the endless conversations about wealth accumulation. I wanted to help people. I wanted a life that meant something tangible. When I sat my parents down at the age of 18 and announced I was going to nursing school to become a pediatric nurse, you would have thought I had committed high treason against the Whitmore name. I will never forget the Thanksgiving dinner right after I got my official nursing license. The dining room smelled heavily of roasted turkey, expensive Cabernet, and burning resentment. The crystal glasses gleamed under the massive chandelier. I had brought Emma, my then-girlfriend and now wife. She was a dedicated public school teacher, a woman with a heart of gold and infinite patience. My mother, Diane, took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, looked Emma up and down like she was inspecting a piece of cheap furniture, and sighed loudly enough for the whole table to hear. "Well, Emma, I suppose you two are a perfect match," Diane said, her voice dripping with condescension. "A teacher and a male nurse. So quaint. Tell me, Joshua, how exactly do you plan to survive on that pathetic salary? Or are you just waiting around for an inheritance that isn't coming? Because let me be clear, we do not subsidize mediocrity in this family." My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. I felt Emma's warm hand reach under the table and squeeze my knee, silently begging me not to take the bait. "We do fine, Mom," I said, keeping my voice rigidly level. "We enjoy our work. We help people." Robert snorted from the head of the long table, carving the turkey with aggressive, sharp strokes of the carving knife. "Work? Changing bedpans and wiping snotty noses isn't work, Joshua. It's menial labor. It's what we hire people to do. Carter just closed a $10 million downtown contract today. That's real work. You're wasting your life and embarrassing this family." That was the standard, exhausting script. They constantly held their money over my head like a weapon, but I never took a single dime from them. Emma and I worked incredibly hard. We paid for our own small, modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. We drove older, reliable cars. We clipped coupons and budgeted our grocery trips. We were independent, and more importantly, we were deeply happy. When our daughter, Hazel, was born 4 years ago, I foolishly allowed a tiny sliver of hope into my heart. I thought a new grandchild, an innocent little life, might soften them. I called my parents directly from the hospital delivery room, my voice cracking with overwhelming joy and exhaustion. Diane answered on the 3rd ring, sounding annoyed. "Joshua, I'm at the salon. Make it quick." "Mom, she's here?" I said, wiping tears from my eyes. "Hazel is born. She's perfectly healthy. She's beautiful." There was a long, cold pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, good. Tell Emma congratulations. I have to go. They're ready for my foil highlights." Click. They didn't visit the hospital. They didn't come to our house to see the nursery we had painted. 3 weeks after Hazel was born, a generic, store-bought greeting card arrived in the mail. Inside was a crisp $20 bill and a brief note in Diane's handwriting. "Buy the baby something nice." It was a devastating slap in the face. When Chloe had her 2 children, Robert instantly bought them each a massive trust fund, and Diane practically moved into Chloe's mansion to play the role of the doting, perfect grandmother for all her wealthy friends to see. But Hazel didn't exist to them because I didn't matter to them. I finally made my peace with it. I realized you cannot force people to love you. Emma and I built a strong, impenetrable wall around our little family. Hazel became the absolute center of our universe. She grew into a bright, laughing little girl who loved chasing butterflies in the backyard, collected seashells in a little bucket, and firmly believed dolphins were magical creatures. We started a college fund for her immediately, putting away every spare dollar we could afford. We didn't need the Whitmore empire. We had enough love to fill 100 mansions. For 3 years, we lived in total, beautiful peace. The only contact I had with my family were brief, incredibly awkward phone calls on major holidays that never lasted more than 5 minutes. I truly thought I had successfully escaped the toxicity. I thought the worst thing they could do to me was simply ignore my existence. I was dead wrong. The nightmare that almost cost me everything actually started 6 months ago, on a rainy, miserable Tuesday evening. I had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift at the children's hospital. We had a code blue in the afternoon, and my nerves were completely frayed. I was bone-tired. My scrubs smelled strongly of antiseptic and hospital cafeteria coffee, and all I wanted in the world was to kiss my beautiful wife and hold my daughter. When I turned my car onto my street and pulled into my driveway, my heart dropped into my stomach. A sleek, black luxury sedan was parked directly in front of my house. I recognized the customized license plate instantly. It was Robert's car. I walked slowly through my front door, my stomach knotting with dread. Robert was sitting right in my living room, completely uninvited, drinking a cup of coffee that Emma had nervously poured for him. He didn't stand up to greet me. He didn't ask how I was doing. He just reached into his designer leather briefcase and pulled out a massive, thick stack of legal papers. "Sit down, Joshua," he commanded, using that booming CEO voice that always made me feel like I was a helpless 10-year-old boy again. "We have urgent business to discuss." "What are you doing here, Dad? It's been over a year since I saw you," I asked, refusing to move toward the armchair. He slapped the heavy stack of papers onto my coffee table. "I'm expanding the company. We are bidding on a massive commercial real estate project downtown. It's a game changer. But the bank requires all immediate family members to co-sign the guarantor forms to spread the liability matrix. It's just a legal formality. I need your signature here, here, and here." I stepped forward and stared down at the documents. I flipped to the second page. The numbers leaped off the paper and punched me in the face. $2.3 million. "Are you insane?" I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. "I'm a pediatric nurse, Dad. I make a modest salary. I don't have $2 million in assets. I'm not signing my name and my family's future to your corporate debt. Robert's eyes narrowed into dark slits. The mask of the confident, successful businessman completely slipped, revealing something dark, ugly, and incredibly desperate underneath. You owe this family, Joshua. Every breath you take is because I put a roof over your head growing up. I fed you. I clothed you. You will sign this document tonight. No, I said firmly, standing my ground. I won't. Leave my house. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He kicked my coffee table so hard my favorite ceramic mug shattered into pieces on the hardwood. You ungrateful little bastard. You have 24 hours to change your mind, or I swear to God, I will ruin your pathetic little life. He stormed out, slamming the front door hard enough to knock a framed picture of Hazel off the wall, shattering the glass. That night, Emma and I sat at the kitchen table in silence, staring at the copy of the documents he had angrily left behind. Emma, who always tried to see the best in people, looked incredibly pale. Joshua, something is terribly wrong here. Massive corporations don't force estranged sons with average incomes to co-sign multi-million-dollar loans unless they are completely, totally out of options. The next morning, I took some of our savings and hired an independent financial investigator. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. It took the investigator exactly 3 days to unearth the truth, and it was far worse than I could have ever imagined. The $2.3 million wasn't for a commercial expansion project at all. It was a desperate cover story. Robert had a crippling, secret gambling addiction that he had kept hidden from the public for over a decade. He had been bleeding the family company dry for years, taking frequent business trips to private, high-stakes poker games offshore. But the real terrifying twist? He didn't just owe Standard banks. He owed Cameron, a ruthless, violent operator deeply tied to the criminal underworld. The construction company was leveraged to the hilt. There was no money left. If Robert didn't pay Cameron the $2 million by the end of the month, they were going to start breaking legs or far worse. And Robert's master plan was to secure a massive, fraudulent bank loan, use my perfectly clean credit history and my signature to push it through the underwriters, pay off the violent mobsters, and leave me holding the bag when the bank inevitably foreclosed on the debt. He was actively trying to financially slaughter his own son to save his own skin. I didn't just call him to say no. I went to a lawyer and sent a certified cease and desist letter telling the Whitmore family to end all contact with me and my wife. That was the exact moment the Whitmore family decided to go to war. When a toxic family realizes they can no longer control you, they will try to control how others see you. And if that fails, they will try to physically and emotionally destroy you. The retaliation started the very next day. My cell phone rang incessantly. It was Diane. When I finally answered, hoping to tell her to back off, her voice was a shrill, piercing shriek that made my eardrum physically ring. "How dare you send a lawyer's letter to your own father?" she screamed, sounding completely unhinged. "You selfish, arrogant piece of garbage. Your father is under immense financial stress right now, and you're turning your back on him. If you don't sign those papers immediately, you are dead to me. Do you hear me? Dead. I've been dead to you for 30 years, Mom," I replied coldly, and hung up the phone. I blocked her number immediately. 2 days later, the real, dangerous escalation began. I was in the middle of a busy morning shift at the hospital, carefully checking an 4-line on a frail 7-year-old leukemia patient. Suddenly, I heard a massive commotion out in the main hallway. I stepped out of the room and saw my brother, Carter, violently pushing past a pair of hospital security guards. His face was flushed bright red with rage, his suit jacket rumpled. "There he is," Carter yelled at the top of his lungs, pointing a rigid finger right at me in front of my shocked colleagues, the nursing staff and frightened patients' families. "That's the guy. He's stealing heavy pain medication from the supply closet. My brother is a junkie. You need to drug test him right now." The entire pediatric hallway went dead silent. My blood ran ice cold. He wasn't just yelling. He was actively trying to destroy my medical license. He was trying to take away my ability to feed my daughter and pay my mortgage. Before Carter could spew another lie, Julian, the hospital director, stepped out of his corner office. Julian was a no-nonsense, highly respected former military trauma doctor who knew my work ethic intimately. He walked up to Carter, looking at him with utter, undisguised disgust. "Sir," Julian said, his voice quiet but carrying immense authority, "I personally run random, comprehensive drug tests on my entire staff monthly, and Nurse Joshua's record is completely spotless. You are trespassing on private property and causing a severe public disturbance in a pediatric ward. Security, remove this man from my hospital immediately. If he resists, call the police and press charges." Carter glared at me with pure hatred as the burly guards grabbed his arms and hauled him away. "This isn't over, Joshua. You're going to pay for this. We will ruin you," he spat, as they dragged him backward toward the elevators. I was shaking with raw adrenaline. But they didn't stop there. They realized I was protected at work, so they went after my wife. Chloe decided to target Emma. Emma worked at a highly prestigious, competitive elementary school. One morning, the principal called Emma into the main office. Anonymous, highly detailed emails had been sent overnight to the school board, claiming Emma was emotionally unstable, prone to violent physical outbursts, and heavily hinting that she was currently under investigation by Child Protective Services for custody issues regarding Hazel. Emma came home that afternoon in absolute tears, her hands shaking as she held the printed emails. The school administration knew she was a stellar, loving teacher and didn't fire her, but protocol dictated they had to formally document the allegations in her permanent file. Chloe was actively trying to ruin my wife's career and reputation. "They're trying to break us?" Emma cried, sitting on the edge of our bed, clutching a framed photo of Hazel to her chest. "They want to squeeze us so hard from every angle that we just give up and sign the papers to make it stop. I will never let them hurt you. I will never let them win," I promised, pulling her tightly into my arms. My initial anger was no longer just defensive. It was rapidly mutating into something cold, sharp, and highly calculated. The terrifying climax of their harassment happened exactly a week later. I finished a grueling late shift and walked out to the hospital's concrete parking garage. The structure was incredibly dim, the fluorescent lights flickering, the concrete echoing loudly with the sound of my lonely footsteps. As I approached my reliable, 10-year-old sedan, my heart sank deeply into my stomach. All 4 of my tires were brutally slashed, the thick rubber ripped to absolute shreds. But that wasn't the worst part. Sprayed across the driver's side door in thick, dripping, neon red paint was a single, terrifying sentence. "Sign it, or accidents happen." I stood there in the freezing garage, the strong, chemical smell of fresh aerosol paint burning my nose. They weren't just threatening my credit score or my job anymore. They were threatening my actual life. They were threatening my family's physical safety. I pulled out my cell phone with shaking hands and called Emma. "Pack a bag right now," I said, my voice eerily calm despite the panic in my chest. "Take Hazel and go to your parents' house 2 towns over. Don't tell anyone where you are going. Don't post on social media." "Joshua, what's wrong? What did they do?" she panicked, hearing the tone of my voice. "Just do it, Em. I'll explain later. I love you." I hung up and stared at the dripping red paint. My family thought I was a pushover. They thought because I chose a life of caregiving and healing, I completely lacked the killer instinct of the Whitmore men. They critically mistook my kindness and patience for weakness. I wasn't going to just file a standard police report for vandalism that would sit on a detective's desk and go absolutely nowhere. I wasn't going to hide in fear for the rest of my life. If they wanted a war, I was going to give them an absolute massacre. "Joshua, your family is incredibly desperate," Veronica said, leaning back in her leather chair. "Desperate people with massive mob debts do not follow the standard rules of a civilized society. A piece of paper like a restraining order is just a minor inconvenience to them. It won't stop them." She leaned forward, clasping her hands together. "If we want to protect your daughter, save your wife's career, and put these people away for a very long time, we cannot just play defense. We have to trap them. We need undeniable, high-definition, admissible proof of them committing a major, undeniable felony. We need them to hang themselves with their own arrogance. How do we do that? I asked, my jaw set with determination. We wait for them to come to you, she said smoothly, a predatory smile forming. And we make sure there are eyes and ears everywhere when they do. Veronica made a phone call and connected me with Aaron, a highly specialized former military intelligence officer who now ran an elite private security firm. Aaron didn't mess around with standard, over-the-counter home alarms. He turned my modest suburban house into a state-of-the-art surveillance fortress. Over the course of 2 intense days, while Emma and Hazel stayed safely hidden at my in-laws' house, Aaron wired my entire property. He worked methodically. He installed tiny, pinhole cameras directly into the smoke detectors in the hallway, inside the air vents of the living room, and completely hidden behind the thickest books on my bookshelf. He placed highly sensitive, high-fidelity microphones in the base of the kitchen chandelier. He even carefully stitched a tiny audio bug deep into the seam of Hazel's favorite stuffed blue dolphin. This entire system is hardwired to a secure, encrypted cloud server managed by my team, Aaron explained, showing me the live feed on a specialized tablet. The video was stunningly crystal clear, capturing every single corner of my living room in 4K resolution. Even if they discover the cameras and physically smash them to pieces, the footage is already uploaded and saved in real time. They can't destroy the evidence. Finally, Aaron reached into his tech bag and handed me a heavy, silver pendant on a thick leather cord. It looked exactly like a generic piece of men's jewelry. "Wear this at all times," he instructed, his tone dead serious. "There is a wide-angle lens hidden right in the center of the metal. It connects directly via a cellular data link. But more importantly, it has a built-in panic feature. We need a safe word, a specific phrase you would never, ever say naturally in a normal conversation. The exact moment you say it, my monitoring team will instantly dispatch heavily armed police directly to your location, overriding the standard 911 queue. They will be breaching your doors in under 4 minutes. I rolled the cold metal pendant in the palm of my hand, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. "Emergency assistance," I said firmly. "Done," Aaron nodded, typing the phrase into his laptop system. For the next agonizing week, I lived in a constant state of hypervigilance. Emma and Hazel finally came back home, but I never let my guard down for a single second. Every time a car drove past the house a little too slowly, the hairs on my arms stood straight up. Every time the phone rang, my heart hammered violently against my ribs. Couldn't sleep. I was actively baiting a trap for monsters, and the monsters wore the faces of my own parents and siblings. I knew I had to draw them out. I made sure to casually drop a hint to a gossipy mutual acquaintance that Emma was going to a weekend educational seminar out of state, leaving me home entirely alone with Hazel for the whole day. I knew with absolute certainty the information would quickly filter back to Diane. They would see it as a moment of extreme vulnerability. A man alone with his young child. The absolute perfect time to apply maximum terrifying pressure. I was right. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon. Hazel was sitting happily on the living room rug, building a tall tower with her colorful blocks. I was in the kitchen, pretending to read a medical journal, but my eyes kept darting nervously to the front window. At exactly 2:15 p.m., a massive black SUV pulled aggressively into my driveway, bumping hard over the concrete curb. I felt a cold, paralyzing sweat break out on the back of my neck. I reached up and touched the silver pendant hidden under my shirt. The car doors opened simultaneously. All 4 of them stepped out. Robert, carrying his heavy leather briefcase. Diane, holding that ridiculous bakery box. Carter, cracking his knuckles like a thug. And Chloe, adjusting her expensive designer sunglasses. They marched up my front walkway in a line, like a corporate execution squad. The doorbell rang. It didn't sound like a chime. It sounded like a funeral toll. I took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing the anger to completely override the fear in my veins. I walked to the front door, turned the deadbolt, and opened it. The trap was officially sprung. "Hello, Joshua," Robert said coldly, pushing his way past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. The rest of them filtered in behind him like a pack of wolves. Carter immediately moved to the right, physically blocking the front door, folding his thick arms across his chest to trap me inside. Diane walked straight into the kitchen, dropping the bakery box on the counter with a loud smack, looking around my clean home with absolute, sneering disgust. Chloe sauntered directly into the living room, her sharp eyes instantly locking onto Hazel on the floor. "Hi, sweetie," Chloe cooed, her voice dripping with toxic, fake sugar. She knelt down right next to my daughter. Hazel instinctively shrank back, her little hands gripping a wooden block tightly. Chloe reached out and clamped her hands down hard on Hazel's shoulders, physically pinning her in place on the rug. "What are you doing here?" I asked, backing up slowly to ensure I kept all four of them in my line of sight, making sure the camera pendant captured everyone. Robert placed his leather briefcase on the coffee table. Snap, snap. He popped the gold latches. He reached in and pulled out the thick stack of loan papers. "This ends today, Joshua," Robert said, his voice dropping into a deadly, quiet register that terrified me more than his yelling. "I am completely out of time, and so are you. We are not leaving this house until you sign these papers." "I told you, I'm not doing it," I said, keeping my voice loud and steady, making sure the hidden audio receivers in the ceiling picked up every single syllable clearly. "That debt is yours. You gambled it away on cards and mob debts. I am not making my family homeless to pay for your criminal mistakes." Diane let out that terrible, scraping laugh from the kitchen. "Your debts too, sweetheart. You owe us everything. The food you ate as a child, the clothes on your back. Your life means nothing to us. Trash like you owns nothing worth keeping. Sign it, or I swear we will take Hazel and let child services deal with you. You have no right to be in my home," I warned them, staring Robert down. "Get out." Robert's face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged fury. He reached inside his tailored suit jacket. When his hand emerged, the overhead living room light glinted off the cold, dark metal of a heavy handgun. My heart slammed against my sternum so hard it physically hurt. The air in the room instantly vanished. "Here's how this works," Robert said, racking the slide of the gun with a sharp, metallic clack. A live bullet was chambered. This wasn't a prop to scare me. "You're going to sit down at that table, sign every single page where I've put a sticky note, and then we're going to leave like one big happy family." I reached into my pocket, pretending to go for my phone. "I'm calling the police right now." Carter lunged forward, moving incredibly fast for his size. He violently slapped the phone out of my hand. It skittered across the hardwood floor, sliding far under the sofa, out of reach. Carter shoved the loan papers hard into my chest. "Do it now, Joshua. Stop being a dramatic loser and just sign the damn papers. This is just a family matter." Diane smiled from the kitchen, her eyes gleaming with pure malice. "We handle our own problems internally. We always have." I looked down at Hazel. She was trembling violently, staring in pure shock at the gun in her grandfather's hand. She let out a soft, heartbreaking whimper. "Let her go, Chloe," I demanded, taking a heavy step forward. Carter shoved me back hard, nearly knocking me over. Robert didn't just hold the gun pointed at me. He stepped forward, closing the distance between him and my little girl. He lowered his arm. He pressed the barrel of the loaded gun directly against the side of Hazel's head. Hazel froze instantly. Her crying stopped. "Sign the loan papers right now or else," Robert roared, spittle flying from his lips. Every protective instinct in my body screamed at me to attack him, to tear his throat out with my bare hands. But I knew if I moved aggressively, he might pull the trigger in a panic. I had to play the card. I had to end this. I looked dead into the hidden lens of the pendant on my chest. "Emergency assistance," I said loudly, clearly, articulating every syllable. Robert scoffed, looking confused. "What the hell are you babbling about? Sign the paper. I won't let you destroy her future," I said, stalling for time. My eyes locked securely on the gun barrel against my daughter's head. I was counting the agonizing seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. "We warned you this might happen," Diane yelled, growing impatient and angry. Robert's finger visibly tightened on the trigger. "This is your last chance, Joshua." I didn't reach for the pen. I lunged. I threw my entire body weight forward, aiming to tackle Robert away from my daughter, sacrificing myself. Bang! The gun went off. The bright flash of the muzzle illuminated the room. The sound was explosive, tearing through the silence like a bomb. Plaster rained down from the ceiling above us. Hazel crumpled to the floor. "No!" I screamed, dropping to my knees. I frantically ran my hands over her head, her back, searching for a wound. She was crying, screaming in pure terror, but there was no blood. Robert had flinched when I moved toward him. He had fired wildly into the ceiling. Before Robert could lower the smoking gun again, the front of my house exploded inward. The heavy wooden front door didn't just open. It was battered completely off its hinges by a massive steel battering ram. The glass windows shattered outward into the yard. "Police! Drop the weapon! Drop it now! Get on the ground!" A terrifying tidal wave of black tactical gear flooded into my living room. There were at least a dozen heavily armed SWAT officers, rifles raised. Multiple red laser sights painted Robert's chest. Robert froze completely, the smoking gun still in his hand, his mouth hanging open in utter, paralyzed shock. I said, "Drop it." Officer Matthew, the squad leader, roared, aiming his rifle right at Robert's head. The gun clattered loudly to the hardwood floor. Matthew tackled Robert incredibly hard, slamming the old man face first into the floorboards, pinning his arms behind his back. Carter threw his hands up in the air, screaming in high-pitched panic, but two officers grabbed him, sweeping his legs out from under him and pinning him down hard. Chloe let go of Hazel and backed against the wall, shrieking hysterically as an officer roughly cuffed her hands behind her back. Diane didn't even have time to run. She was shoved face first against the kitchen counter, steel handcuffs snapping shut around her wrists. I scooped Hazel up into my arms, holding her to my chest so tightly I thought I might break her. I buried my face in her hair, sobbing uncontrollably. She was safe. She was alive. Once the room was completely secured, Matthew hauled Robert up to his knees. Robert's nose was bleeding profusely, staining my rug. He looked around wildly, trying to regain his authority. "This is a mistake," Robert yelled, his arrogance somehow returning. "This is my son's house. We were just having a family disagreement. He attacked me. I was defending myself." Diane chimed in, weeping fake, desperate tears. "Officer, my son is insane. He tried to hurt us. He's a liar." I stood up, holding Hazel securely on my hip. I walked over and stood directly over my father. I looked down at the pathetic, broken, bleeding man kneeling on my floor. I reached up and tapped the silver pendant on my chest. Then, I pointed to the smoke detector above us. Then to the bookshelf. "You think you're smart, Dad?" I said, my voice echoing coldly in the sudden quiet of the room. "You think you can come into my home, hold a gun to my child's head, and just lie your way out of it?" Robert followed my finger, his eyes widening to the size of saucers as realization began to slowly dawn on him. "You didn't just threaten me?" I whispered, leaning in incredibly close so he could see the absolute disgust burning in my eyes. "You performed for an audience. Every word you said, every threat you made, that gunshot, it wasn't just recorded. It was broadcast live to the police department on a secure cloud feed. They heard you threaten her. They saw you pull the trigger. You're not going home to your mansion, Robert. You're going to die in a cage." All the color drained entirely from Robert's face. The mighty, terrifying CEO collapsed inward, suddenly looking like a very old, very weak, very stupid man. Diane stopped crying instantly. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Carter began to hyperventilate on the floor, realizing his privileged, wealthy life was completely over. "Get this trash out of my house," I told Officer Matthew. "This is a moment that changed everything, when I finally regained control of my life. Thank you for your patience in getting this far. You are amazing. Please help me like the video and leave a comment with the number 1 below so I know you've been with me this far. This will not only help more people find this story, but also let me know that my experiences are meaningful to someone. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey." The immediate aftermath of a hurricane is always a strange, eerie calm. The flashing red and blue lights from half a dozen police cruisers bathed my quiet suburban street in a chaotic, rhythmic glow. Neighbors had spilled out onto their front lawns, standing in stunned, open-mouthed silence as the wealthy Whitmore family was paraded out of my house in handcuffs. I stood on my front porch, holding a warm blanket tightly around Hazel. She had finally stopped crying and was now resting her head heavily on my shoulder, completely exhausted by the sheer terror of the trauma. I watched as Carter was dragged out first. The golden boy, the untouchable vice president of operations, was sobbing so hard he couldn't even walk straight. As he passed the porch light, I noticed a dark, wet stain spreading rapidly down the front of his expensive khaki pants. He had literally wet himself in terror. He wouldn't even look up at me as the officers shoved his head down and pushed him into the back of a cruiser. Chloe was brought out next. She was fighting the officers, screaming at the top of her lungs about her rights, demanding her lawyer, and demanding to call Dylan so he could initiate an immediate custody protection plan for her own kids. The female officer simply pushed her head down firmly and forced her into the car, slamming the heavy door shut on her shrieks. Diane was an entirely different story. As they walked her slowly down the front path, she locked her desperate eyes with mine. The viciousness, the superiority, the cold laughter. It was all completely gone, replaced by a pathetic, desperate pleading. "Joshua! Joshua! Please!" she begged, thick black mascara tears ruining her expensive makeup, running down her cheeks. "We're your family. I'm your mother. You can't let them do this to me. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them we were joking." I didn't say a single word. I didn't even blink. I just turned my back to her and walked back inside my shattered house. I heard her agonizing wail of despair before the police car door slammed shut, cutting her off. Robert was the very last to be taken out. He was completely silent. He didn't struggle. The crushing reality of the airtight trap I had built for him had crushed whatever fight he had left in his body. He looked entirely hollowed out, a ghost of the man who had entered my house 20 minutes ago. 10 minutes later, tires screeched violently in my driveway. Emma had driven like a maniac from the seminar the absolute moment Aaron's security team alerted her to the breach. She bolted through the shattered front doorway, dropping her purse onto the floor without caring. "Joshua! Hazel!" I met her in the hallway. We collapsed into each other, a desperate tangle of arms and tears. Emma kissed Hazel's cheeks, her forehead, checking her all over for injuries, crying tears of absolute, overwhelming relief. "They're gone, Em," I whispered into her hair, holding her tight. "It's over. We got them. They can't hurt us ever again." Veronica, my lawyer, arrived shortly after the crime scene investigators started taking detailed photos of the bullet hole in my ceiling and bagging the shell casing. She looked incredibly calm and professional amidst the utter chaos. She walked over to us, handing me a paper cup of water. "I just reviewed the raw security footage with the district attorney," Veronica said, a sharp, highly satisfied smile playing on her lips. "Joshua, it is an absolute masterclass in criminal evidence. The audio is pristine. The video is undeniable. We have Robert explicitly making the threat with a deadly weapon. We have Diane acting as an accessory and inciting violence. We have Chloe restraining a minor, and Carter committing physical assault. It's open and shut. They are buried." "Will they get bail?" Emma asked, her voice trembling slightly. For attempted murder, kidnapping, and armed coercion with a minor present? Veronica scoffed loudly. Not a chance in hell. They are going to sit in a county jail cell until their trial. And trust me, the prosecution is going to push for the absolute maximum sentences allowed by state law. I looked around my living room. The fine white drywall dust was still settling over the coffee table where the fraudulent loan papers lay abandoned. The front door was splintered wood. The house was broken, physically damaged by the violence of my blood relatives. But as I looked at Emma holding Hazel, I didn't feel broken. For the first time in my entire 32 years of life, I felt completely, undeniably free. The Whitmore family had spent my entire life trying to convince me I was weak. They pushed me, mocked me, financially threatened me, and finally, they tried to sacrifice my innocent daughter on the altar of their own greed. They truly thought they were the apex predators. They were wrong. I just let them walk willingly into the cage before I locked the door behind them. The 8 agonizing months leading up to the criminal trial felt like holding my breath underwater. When you finally stand up to your lifelong abusers, the world doesn't just magically fix itself overnight. There is a long, grueling, emotionally exhausting process of untangling your life from theirs. My parents, desperate to avoid prison, liquidated whatever assets they could to hire a small army of the most expensive defense attorneys in the state. Their legal team tried every dirty, underhanded trick in the book to get the surveillance footage thrown out of court. They argued vehemently that because my house was a private residence, recording them without their explicit, written consent violated state wiretapping laws. But my lawyer, Veronica, was ready for them. She expertly proved to the judge that because they had violently forced their way into my home to commit armed coercion and attempted murder, any reasonable expectation of privacy was instantly forfeited. The judge took one look at the initial motions and shut down the defense completely. The video was fully admissible, every single devastating frame of it. When the trial finally began in the fall, the atmosphere in the courtroom was suffocatingly tense. I sat at the prosecution table, wearing a simple, clean suit, my hands folded tightly together to stop them from shaking. Emma sat right behind me in the crowded gallery, her presence a warm, steady anchor. I watched as the bailiffs led my family into the room. It was a profoundly shocking sight. The mighty Whitmore family had been completely stripped of their gilded armor. Robert wasn't wearing his custom Italian silk suits anymore. He was drowning in an oversized, faded Orange County Jail jumpsuit. His hair, once perfectly styled, had gone completely white, and the arrogant posture of the wealthy CEO was entirely gone. He shuffled to his seat, looking firmly at the floor. Diane looked even worse. Without her weekly salon appointments, hair dyes, and expensive skin treatments, she had aged a decade in 8 months. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow, darting nervously around the courtroom. Carter, the golden boy who was used to unearned praise and instant gratification, looked physically ill. He kept twitching, his leg bouncing rapidly up and down under the defense table. Chloe just stared blankly ahead, her face puffy and red from constant crying. The trial was not a drawn-out legal mystery. It was a public execution. The prosecution didn't need to weave a complicated, confusing narrative for the jury. They simply set up a massive television monitor directly in front of the jury box, dimmed the courtroom lights, and pressed play. For the next 20 minutes, absolute, chilling silence fell over the room, broken only by the high-definition audio of my own family destroying themselves. The jury watched Robert kick my front door open. They watched Diane drop the bakery box and sneer at my home. They watched Carter violently shove me to the floor. They listened to Diane laugh and call her own son trash. And then came the moment that made 3 jurors visibly gasp and cover their mouths in horror. The screen showed Robert pulling the handgun from his jacket. It showed him walking up to my 4-year-old daughter. It showed him pressing the cold steel barrel against her tiny temple. The high-quality audio captured Hazel's terrified whimper, Chloe's sinister voice telling her to hold still, and Robert screaming his ultimatum. Then the gunshot, the bright muzzle flash. my daughter collapsing to the floor. When the video ended and the lights came back on, you could hear a pin drop in that courtroom. I looked over at the defense table. Robert's high-priced lawyers were staring at their legal pads, refusing to make eye contact with the jury or the judge. You cannot cross-examine a video. You cannot gaslight a high-definition recording. But the prosecution wasn't finished. They were determined to salt the earth. They didn't just want to prove attempted murder. They wanted to expose the rotting core of the Whitmore empire to prove motive. The first major shockwave hit the courtroom on the third day. The prosecution called a surprise witness. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the room opened, and Dylan walked in. Dylan was Chloe's husband, the wealthy investment banker my parents absolutely adored. Chloe's head snapped up when she saw him. She started whispering frantically to her lawyer, sheer panic washing over her face. Dylan walked confidently to the witness stand, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. He didn't look at his wife once. "Mr. Hayes," the prosecutor began, "can you describe your current relationship with the defendant, Chloe Whitmore?" "We are currently separated," Dylan said, his voice cold and clinical. "I filed for a divorce 3 months ago, and I am actively pursuing full, unshared custody of our 2 children." Chloe let out a strangled sob, burying her face in her hands. Dylan testified that after seeing the security footage the police had collected, he realized the woman he married was a monster. He told the jury that Chloe had come home the week before the home invasion and bragged about how they were going to squeeze Joshua until he broke. He confirmed that the entire family knew about Robert's massive gambling debts to the criminal underworld. "She told me that sacrificing Joshua's financial future was the only way to protect her own inheritance," Dylan testified, his voice echoing in the silent room. "She was willing to let her own niece be traumatized, or worse, just so she wouldn't lose her country club membership and her trust fund. I cannot, in good conscience, allow a woman capable of holding a gun to a child's head to have any part in raising my own children." It was a devastating blow. Dylan had completely destroyed any defense Chloe had about being an unwilling participant. He handed the prosecution the exact motive wrapped in a neat bow. But the biggest twist of the trial was saved for Carter. Carter's lawyer had been arguing that Carter was just following his father's orders out of fear. He claimed Carter was a dedicated son, the hard-working vice president of the family construction business, and that he only shoved me out of misguided familial loyalty. The prosecution called a forensic accountant to the stand. This man had spent the last 6 months digging through the frozen assets of the Whitmore Construction Company. "Can you explain to the jury why Robert Whitmore's company was in such dire financial straits, aside from his gambling debts?" the prosecutor asked. The accountant adjusted his glasses. "Yes, while Robert Whitmore was siphoning funds to pay off illicit debts, his son, Carter Whitmore, was actively bleeding the company from the inside. Over the last 5 years, since his unearned promotion to vice president, Carter systematically embezzled over $4 million. The entire courtroom erupted in loud murmurs. Robert's head snapped violently toward Carter. The father looked at his golden boy with a mixture of profound shock and pure, unadulterated hatred. Carter set up dummy vendor accounts. The accountant explained smoothly to the stunned jury. He approved fake invoices for construction materials that never existed, funneling the money directly into offshore accounts in his own name. Robert's gambling put the company in jeopardy, but Carter's massive theft is what pushed it into terminal bankruptcy. Robert needed the $2.3 million loan from Joshua to pay off his bookie, but he didn't realize the company accounts were already empty because his own son had stolen everything. I watched my family implode right there at the defense table. Robert actually lunged at Carter, his hands reaching desperately for his son's throat, screaming obscenities. The bailiffs had to physically tackle Robert and drag him aggressively back to his chair. Carter was weeping openly, burying his head in his arms. Diane sat frozen, realizing her perfect, wealthy family was nothing but a fragile house of cards built on lies, theft, and blood. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When the foreman read the verdicts, I felt a massive physical weight lift off my chest that I didn't even know I was carrying. Guilty. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later. The judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for violence against children, looked down at my family with absolute, unfiltered disgust. In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a display of greed and depravity quite like this, the judge stated, her voice ringing out like a bell. You viewed your own son not as a human being, but as a financial asset to be exploited. You terrorized a peaceful family. And Robert Whitmore, you pointed a loaded firearm at the head of an innocent 4-year-old girl. You are a danger to society, and you are a disgrace to the very concept of family. The gavel came down with terrifying finality. Robert was sentenced to 23 years in a maximum security state penitentiary. Given his advanced age, it was effectively a death sentence. He would leave that prison in a pine box. Diane received 18 years for her role in the conspiracy, her active encouragement of the violence, and felony child endangerment. The judge made it abundantly clear that her laughter during the assault demonstrated a severe, psychopathic lack of human empathy. Carter, the golden boy who thought the world owed him everything, was sentenced to 7 years for assault, kidnapping, and his part in the coercion. The embezzlement charges were handled in a separate federal trial, which eventually added another decade to his time behind bars. Chloe accepted a plea deal after Dylan's devastating testimony destroyed her case. She received 5 years for child endangerment and conspiracy. Dylan won full custody of their kids. Chloe lost everything she valued. The civil suits came next, because I had meticulously documented the harassment, the vandalism, and the severe emotional distress inflicted on my family. Veronica filed a massive lawsuit against their remaining estate. The courts wholeheartedly agreed with us. My parents were stripped of virtually every asset they possessed to pay damages. The sprawling estate where I grew up feeling like an outsider was sold at public auction. The construction company was liquidated to pay off legitimate creditors and the massive legal fees. There was no inheritance left for anyone. There was nothing but total ruin. As we walked out of the courthouse on the final day, the bright afternoon sun felt warmer than I remembered. Emma held my hand tightly. We didn't celebrate. There is no joy in watching your blood relatives destroy themselves. But there was profound peace. The storm was finally over. 3 years have passed since that dark Saturday afternoon in our living room. The healing process wasn't instantaneous. Hazel needed extensive play therapy to process the severe trauma. For the first few months, she had terrible nightmares. She would wake up screaming in the dark, terrified that the loud man was in her closet. Emma and I spent countless nights sleeping on the hard floor next to her bed, holding her small hand, reassuring her that the monsters were locked away in cages and could never, ever hurt her again. But children are incredibly resilient. With time, immense love, and professional help, the dark shadows in her mind began to recede. She started drawing colorful butterflies and dolphins again. Her bright laughter, which had been silenced by a gunshot, returned to fill our home. We didn't stay in that house. It held too many dark ghosts. Emma and I sold the property, packed up our lives, and moved 3 states away to a beautiful, sunny coastal town. We wanted a fresh start, a place where the Whitmore name meant absolutely nothing to anyone. I found a wonderful job at a local pediatric clinic, working with a team of doctors who deeply respect my dedication. Emma was quickly hired at a fantastic elementary school. Our combined salary is more than enough to give us a comfortable, beautiful life. We bought a new house with a big backyard, a wooden swing set, and a view of the ocean. We restarted Hazel's college fund, ensuring her future is bright and entirely secure. Hazel is 7 years old now. She is thriving in the 2nd grade. She is obsessed with marine biology and spends her weekends dragging Emma and me to the local aquarium. She is a happy, confident little girl who knows she is fiercely loved and protected. She vaguely remembers the bad people who went away, but the sharp edges of the memory have dulled into a distant story. Occasionally, the past tries to reach out. Every few months, a letter will arrive in our mailbox with the Department of Corrections return address. They are usually from Diane, begging for forgiveness, complaining about the terrible prison food and her cellmate, asking if she can just speak to Hazel on the phone for 5 minutes. Sometimes, a letter comes from Robert, demanding I contact his new appeals lawyer to recant my testimony. I don't open them. I walk straight to the paper shredder in my home office, feed the unopened envelopes into the machine, and listen to the highly satisfying sound of their toxic words being reduced to confetti. They are dead to me. That part of my life is a permanently closed chapter. The day they went to prison was essentially a funeral without a casket, a mourning period for parents I never truly had to begin with. I learned a profound truth through this terrifying nightmare. Blood does not make a family. Blood just makes you related by genetics. Real family is built on respect, loyalty, and unconditional love. Family is Emma, holding me together when I felt like I was falling apart. Family is Hazel, trusting me to keep her safe from the monsters. Family is the friends and neighbors in our new town who show up for backyard barbecues and school plays. I chose my family, and the family I chose is beautiful. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is completely quiet, I will walk into Hazel's room. I will stand by the door and listen to the soft, rhythmic sound of her breathing. I look at her little face, relaxed in peaceful sleep, surrounded by her stuffed animals. I remember the cold terror of that handgun. I remember the smell of the gunpowder burning my nose. But then I remember the feeling of standing up to the monsters. I remember the look on my father's face when he realized his empire of fear was completely crumbling. I protected my child. I fought back. And we survived. That is the legacy I am passing down to my daughter. Not a legacy of inherited wealth or corporate titles, but a legacy of immense strength. She will grow up knowing that her father would tear the world apart to keep her safe. She will know that no one, no matter how much money they have or what blood flows in their veins, has the right to abuse her. We are safe. We are happy. And we are free. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. It's not easy to revisit the darkest moments of your life, but I share this because I know someone out there is listening who feels trapped. Someone who is being manipulated by the very people who are supposed to protect them. Here is the educational lesson, the core truth I want you to take away from my story. Toxic family members rely heavily on your silence and your ingrained sense of obligation. They use your guilt as a weapon to control you. But you do not owe your abusers anything. You do not owe them your financial stability, your mental health, or your children's safety just because you share a genetic code. Setting strict boundaries is not an act of betrayal. It is an act of absolute survival. If someone repeatedly shows you that they are willing to destroy your life for their own benefit, believe them the first time. Document everything, protect yourself legally, and do not be afraid to walk away. The bravest thing you can ever do is break the cycle of abuse and choose your own peace. I would love to hear your thoughts. What was your favorite takeaway or lesson from my story? How do you handle toxic relationships in your own life? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, or simply comment the word good, so I know you appreciate the lessons this story brings. Your engagement means the world to me and helps push this message out to others who might desperately need to hear it. Stay safe, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.